Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is still regarded as one of the best Dragon Ball Z games of all time for good reason. Though even the greatest Dragon Ball Z game has humble beginnings, and one of those humble beginnings for Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is its prototype that is actually playable and fully functional, and that's what we're going to be going over today. We'll be taking a deeper dive into the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 prototype. I have a link to the first part of the series where I took a pretty deep dive into the Budokai Tenkaichi 3 prototype, but today we'll be taking an even deeper dive into the prototype. I hope you guys all enjoy. To start things off today, I'm thinking we should go over some more prototype renders. These are some of my favorite parts of the prototype, just to see like how the art changed between the prototype and the final game. Like in the last video where we went over Goku mid's render, there's plenty more renders to go over than just Goku mid. So let's take a deep dive into some more renders for the prototype characters of Budokai Tenkaichi 3. First off, we have Goku early. The one on the left is the prototype, the one on the right is his final render. The one on the left, you can just see his shading. He's a little more tan than the final build. That's about it in terms of changes. Here's the Goku mids. Well, the Goku mids, we already saw them earlier. I actually really like the prototype one. The final one looks a little more iconic though. Super Saiyan 2 Goku's next up. You can see right here in the left render, he's actually in his Super Saiyan form. His bang on the front of his head is actually there, the third one on the right. You can actually see it there. So he's actually Super Saiyan 1.5 here. He has electric aura in a Super Saiyan 1 status, which I think is pretty neat. Here's Teen Gohan's render. His render's a little bit different than the final one. You can just see he's more looking towards the left rather than looking towards the camera in the final build. And then his hair looks a little bit different, being a little more simplistic in the final release, where his hair is going all over the place, and the left build kind of reminds me of Ultimate Gohan from Superhero a little bit. Here's Super Saiyan Teen Gohan. In the left version, he actually has completely yellow hair, while on the right it's more of like that blondish hair that they have in the Cell games. The one on the right I personally like a lot better, but the one on the left looks pretty good, and I could have honestly seen this being used as his final build. Adult Gohan here's up next. He has a little bit of a wacky one. His eyes are a little odd. He's looking a little out of it in the left render. He's also a tiny bit shorter from what I can tell. The one on the right, of course, is the final build. Looks pretty good, but the one on the left looks all right for being a prototype, but I'm kind of glad they updated this one. Gouter Vegeta is up next, and there's not too many differences here, and it might be a little hard to tell what the difference is. However, his eyebrows are the difference here. They're a bit more curvy in the prototype, with his eyes being a little bit bigger. The one on the right actually has, just the completely pointed down eyebrows and smaller eyes. I think the one on the right looks a lot better, but this one looks pretty good. But this looks actually very similar to the BT2 render, the one on the left. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you what's wrong with this Vegeta render. It looks just a little funny on the left, but the one on the right, of course, is the final build. They really updated this one. Looks very good. I'm very glad they didn't leave this one the same. It's not the worst looking drawing of all time, but it's good they updated it. Second form Vegeta is pretty interesting. He's kind of like a combination between the last two Vegetas. The one on the left you can just see his face is a little bit different. He's a little bit more angry. The one on the right looks a bit more standard. I think the one on the left could have actually passed 4 in the final game though, so that's pretty good. So there's actually a very interesting fact with the next few characters coming up, and these are the Trunkses. For some reason, they all use the Goku from Budokai Tenkaichi 2 to render like a blacked out silhouette of that for their character select screen icons, where instead they only have their final build on the right. They all just share the same Goku blacked out render for some reason. I assume this was just meant as a placeholder, but they obviously had their names in games to differentiate the Trunkses. Gotenks is up next. His render looks very similar to that Teen Gohan render, where he's more looking towards the camera now in his left side render, while on the right he's actually looking to the left. This is actually the inverse of the Gohan, who was looking at the camera in the final render, but looking towards the left in the final build. So it's kind of interesting how the little dichotomy between those two characters. Also, his face doesn't look as finished as it does in the final build, and his hair is a lot more spiky in the left version of the photo. It kind of reminds me of Vegeta's hair, to be honest with you. I'm very glad they updated Gotenks render. Vegeta's a pretty interesting case study, as I was always under the impression that the Vegeta on the left was from Budokai Tenkaichi 2, but upon further inspection, it wasn't. This Vegeta on the left, it looks okay, but obviously the one on the right is way more iconic, but the one on the left actually could have passed for his final render, and if it was its final render, I don't think anybody would be upset about it. And last up is the last characters, being Capito, Slug, Cooler, Zanya, and Super 17, all having the blacked out Goku render as well, just like the Trunkses. Unfortunately, we don't get to see prototype art of them, and funnily enough, the random select icon got modified as well, being the fact that, if you remember in the final game, Goku mid was actually the random select icon, so they actually updated the render from the the prototype to the final build, they updated it to match the Goku mid render update from the prototype, which is pretty cool. And the question mark actually looks a bit different too, which is pretty cool. To be completely honest with you, I wasn't expecting there to be that many characters with different illustrations from the final game. If you know what build I'm playing, the Taikon Bond build, which I covered in the last video, this build is dated a few months before release of Budokai Tenkaichi 3, so the fact that there's so many illustration changes is honestly crazy, combined with all the gameplay changes from the final build. It just goes to show you how much was put into making this game as good as it was. Or should I say, as good as it is. But moving on from character illustrations, let's talk about some fun stuff I noticed. Something else I doubt very many people picked up on is actually in Goku Mid again. Goku Mid sure has a lot of changes from the final game. It's honestly really funny. But something very funny that I noticed with Goku Mid's name, if you look at his name in the prototype, it says Goku Mid with a period, right? Well, in the final build, he doesn't have a period in his name after Mid. I'm honestly not sure why they got rid of the period, because it like signifies it's standing for middle, but honestly, I think it's pretty funny how this was changed. Something else funny is that the background used for the random select icon, and just the background in general, if you have it over random, is actually the character select screen from Budokai Tenkaichi 2. This is interesting as well, because if you remember in the last video, I talked about how the game was internally referred to as Budokai Tenkaichi 2, and how just a lot of the gameplay mechanics are still based around the BT2 counterpart, and the fact that some attacks behave exactly like they did in BT2. Let's take a little stroll away from non-gameplay related changes, and let's hop into an actual game itself. Speaking of game itself, like before, I'll be leaving a game at the end of the video for you guys to watch to see if you pick up any changes that I might have missed, or feel free to let me know if you see any. But hopping into the game itself, something that I noticed with Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta actually is the fact that whenever you use power up to the very limit, there's actually two changes. For one, whenever you use it, the VFX, or just the effects around the attack, are a lot different than they are in the final build. The effects in the prototype are more akin to like the charge up aura rather than like the fiery explosion in the final game. I thought this was very neat.
Interesting.
Related to power up to the very limit as well, when you get the buffs and the debuffs after you use your ultimate attack, it doesn't actually show, but if you pay close attention, you'll notice the debuffs are actually present. You're doing less damage, you're also charging a lot slower, your defense is a lot lower, and so on and so forth. This is pretty interesting because I assume the art for the icons in the debuffs and buffs have not been drawn yet, and that's why this is an actual thing. If you remember last time when I talked about the fact that all Kamehameha skills cost 2 key bars, well, funnily enough, the Kaioken Kamehameha from mid Goku still doesn't cost 2 key bars. It actually costs 3 for some reason, which I find pretty interesting because it's still a Kamehameha skill in the final game, and then in this game of course it is as well, but it doesn't cost 2 key bars, so while it may have its spelling error fixed, its cost has not been fixed yet, which is pretty funny. While we're on the topic of mid Goku yet again, in the craziest twist of fate I've ever seen, how Kaioken Kamehameha in the final build, if you're not aware, has a spelling error where it's spelled as Kaiken Kamehameha. Well, in the prototype, the spelling error is fixed. Goku mid's meteor combination is misspelled as Meteo combination if you look closely. I just find this so funny how like they fixed this spelling error but then created a new one in the final game. I saw this and I was just starstruck. I was like, there's no way this is real. Something fun that I noticed is with Majin Vegeta actually, is Majin Vegeta's Big Bang attack actually has a completely different camera than it does in Budokai Tenkaichi 3's final build, which I thought was pretty neat. Something that it took me a while to notice, and I'm surprised it didn't take me a lot less time to notice, is actually Super Explosive Wave. In the final build, we know how good Super Explosive Wave looks. Well, in BT1 and BT2, we also know how it looks, right? Where it's just like aura of smoke. Well, Super Explosive Wave in the prototype for BT3 still uses the effects from BT2, which I thought was very cool. It behaves exactly like it does in BT3, where it's just like a repeatable hit. Well, in the original Budokai Tenkaichi games, it was actually just like it hit the enemy once and didn't hit them repeatedly. Well, it behaves like it does in BT3. It actually looks like it does in BT2, which is a pretty cool mix. I kind of wish there was an option to change it in the final game, but it makes sense why there isn't. And funnily enough, I haven't noticed a ton more changes, but before we finish up, the last thing I noticed though is the pause menu and finish menu are missing options. Mainly the pause menu and the finish menu when you finish a match are missing the return to main menu option. Of course, in the last video I talked about how, you know, the main menu is not actually accessible in the game, and while it's technically in the game only loads versus mode unless you use an action replay code to make it so it can load other modes. Unfortunately, like last time, not get it working no matter what I did, but regardless, and that's honestly it for a lot of the stuff I noticed. Rewatching a bunch of footage, I didn't notice too much else, but that's about it for what I noticed, though I will leave you guys off of the match, of course. If you guys noticed anything else, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thanks again to the cutting room floor for helping me make this video. This video would not have been possible without their website, so please go check them out. The link is in the description, plus any other sources I might have used. But I guess I'll leave you guys with this upcoming match. I will see you all in the next video. Peace out.
Come on, let's see what you got.
So you plan on defying me? Ready? Fight!
Destructive wave! Die! Die! I'll beat you to death!
Your turn! I'll leave the rest to you!
There! Useless! Die! I'll beat you to death!